Good evening. I'm Marc Cave, and today is the 76th anniversary of the liberation of a camp that holds perhaps a unique place in Holocaust and post-Holocaust history. On the 15th of April 1945, the British Army entered Bergen-Belsen in North Germany and couldn't believe their eyes. Now, we'll be looking at this through the eyes of two people who were there. Marla Tribich, who was is a survivor, and Corporal Ian Forsyth, who was part of the liberating army regiment from Britain. We'll also be joined slightly later on by the director of the Bergen-Belsen Memorial to tell us some really fascinating stuff about what happened after 45. Now, the point I want to make before introducing these wonderful guests is that I assume that you watching will be quite familiar with the horrific images of walking skeletons and piles of corpses walking around, lying around the camp. We will be showing a small selection of really tough images, but there will be a context to it. By and large, we've chosen to not show all the usual awful stuff. We are assuming that you're familiar with it, and we're not here to be maudlin. Tonight is about focusing on some of the lesser known aspects of this really remarkable location and what it stood for before and after 45, as I say. And in particular, the exemplary humanitarian aid that Britain gave to some 60,000 surviving inmates at Belsen when they arrived, and some of the political problems that it ran into post-war. Because this is the first in a three-part series about Britain's relationship to the Holocaust, which we've called Britain, bystander or upstander. Now, it's fashionable to knock and criticize. Not here to do that. Here to remember what happened. We're here to honor those who lost their lives. And above all, we're here to salute the individual survivors and liberators. And that's why I'm so looking forward to introducing you to two of them. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce a truly dignified and impressive survivor and human being. On April the 15th, 1945, 76 years ago today, Marla Helfgott, a 14-year-old Polish Jewish girl from Piotrków, was lying on a bunk bed in the camp, stricken with typhus. Now, she recovered. She grew up to become Marla Tribich, MBE, and I'm delighted that she's joining me tonight. Hello, Marla.
Hello.
You're there. You're there. You okay?
Yes. Okay. Good. Well, how did I come to be there?
Yes? Sorry, just to say to everybody before we ask you the first question, I think this will run for about 50 minutes, but you never know with these things. But however long it runs for, there will be a Q&A at the end. So for those of you who would like to submit questions through YouTube, please do that now. And we will be having a Q&A at the end for those of you who wish to stay on. Okay, so Marla, good evening. This must be, well, how is this day for you? Is it a very emotional day? Is it how do you feel?
I feel it quite deeply. It's really a day of reflection. And I'm thinking about all the victims.
Yeah.
And how lucky I am to be here, really.
And strong. So just to set the scene, I said, on that morning, 76 years ago, you were ill with typhus in that bunk bed. Could you just tell us, how did you come to be there? What was your journey to that point?
My life started off in Poland, as you mentioned, in Piotrków. And war broke out in 1939. And we were the first town in Poland to have a ghetto. And also our town was invaded within a very short time. Within 5 days, the invaders were there. Because we're on the German side, not all that far from the German border. And as I said, then we were within the ghetto walls within 2 months by the 1st of November. And then after 2.5 years, there were going to be deportations. We knew that they were going to be to not to labor camps, but to death camps.
Yes.
And everybody was in panic. And my parents managed to make arrangements for me and my cousin. Well, her parents made arrangements, and our parents made arrangements together for us to go to another town, Częstochowa, which was on the German border. And there was a man there who was willing to hide 2 Jewish girls during the deportations, and they returned them. But it was going to be for money. It was a business arrangement. And this man came, and things were discussed, and he was paid in advance, came back to collect us one at a time. And while we were there, I won't go into details. It was very stressful because we were supposed to be relatives from Warsaw, and we were on false papers. And sometimes if people came in, it was okay for us to mix. Other times they very quickly hid us into a cupboard under the bed, anywhere out of sight. Mm-hmm. And we were very homesick and very scared and very vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But my cousin Ija, who was an only child, she asked to go back. She couldn't bear it. She was really very, very upset by it all. And, well, she said that her parents have good friends and they'll take her in. Anyway, her story it's a long story, but I can only tell you that she disappeared without trace. Nobody knows till this day what happened to Ija, an only child. After that, I got back into the ghetto. I was smuggled in, and soon after that, they started rounding out people the ghetto was reduced from 28,000 to 2,200.
Wow.
And all these people had jobs. They were located in two factories, a plywood place and plywood manufacturing, and the other one was a glass works.
Yes.
And there was, in the meantime, one of my aunts on the Helfgott side was rounded up, taken away screaming, "Who look after my child?" She had a 5-year-old daughter. By then, I was the only Helfgott female member of the family left, so it was down to me. I was 12, and Anne was 5, and I looked after her. Soon after that, we were transferred to a labor camp where I became a slave laborer. Anne didn't work. She was a very small, little, frail girl.
Yes.
And after about 18 months there, we were deported to Ravensbrück. And then from Ravensbrück,
which was the women only camp, right?
Women only, yes. And there's quite a story to it, but I can only tell you we weren't there very long, and then we were deported to Bergen-Belsen.
Did you know why at the time that you were moved?
No, we were just constantly being moved around.
Yeah.
But the thing is that wherever we arrived, we thought, well, it can't be worse than that anywhere. We always thought, well, this is the worst place. But it continued to get worse and worse. And when we thought it couldn't get any worse. But of course, when we arrived in Bergen-Belsen, we thought, my God, it can't get worse than that. And well, it didn't, because we got liberated there.
And how did you all the way through this? Was your overriding emotion terror, fear, or how? I mean, can you remember? Beyond the facts, how do you feel?
Well, there was a lot of fear. We were constantly terrified.
Yeah.
There were all different situations arising all the time, because they would, for instance, turn up, say, in the ghetto unexpectedly and start searching, and we didn't know what they were after, whether we're going to leave with them or whether we're going to stay. And there were there was fear all the way through.
Yeah.
In fact, I can't even, when I think back, I can't recollect the total deep fear, thankfully, because, one couldn't live with it all one's life.
No.
But however fearful I was, I believe that was nothing compared with the parents who had the fairly full measure of the situation. They were much more aware than the children would be, and how they felt and trying to protect their children. For them, it must have been unbearable.
No, I'm sure that's right. So to some small degree, ignorance was bliss for you compared to, as you say, the grown-ups.
In a way, we were very scared, but as I say, the comparison, well, it doesn't compare really.
No. So we had a picture up on the screen before when you were talking of Belsen, vast, complex, huge place. That picture doesn't really do it justice. I haven't actually seen a picture that does. It's so sprawling. But there you were. On that day of liberation, as we said before, you were really ill. I don't know how long you'd had typhus for in the camp. Tell us a bit about that and what you remember about that day of liberation in particular.
Well, we were extremely lucky in Belsen in that we managed to get ourselves into a children's home that was there. Mm-hmm. It was a home for Dutch children with a very special history of its own that I don't have time to tell you. But getting in there meant that we were just slightly protected. And, we weren't much better off for food, but when these people who looked after us, who were inmates themselves, but we call them sisters, like nursing sisters.
Yeah.
They were very kind, and whenever they used to go to the kitchens, they would beg for a little extra food for the children. And it was that much better on the main camp, but even there, I contracted typhus. Mm. And there was no medicines, not even clean water. How anyone managed to survive typhus is a real miracle.
Yeah.
But I did survive it. I think I must have been coming back into consciousness on my upper bunk by the window.
Yes.
When I saw people running. And that was such an amazing sight because they weren't running fast, but they were running. I didn't know where or why. All I could think of was how did they have the strength to run?
Yes.
Because typhus is such a debilitating illness. Yes. You really can't move. And that was the 15th of May, 1945, when we were liberated by the British Army.
Yeah. So all of the horrific pictures that I really want to try and avoid showing, of course, but I just urge everyone to just think about all of those skeletal pictures we've seen and then now imagine them, as Marla is saying, getting up and running towards something. At that time, you didn't know what, Marla, but it must have been an extraordinary feat of physical effort. Mm. So you didn't know you didn't know who was there. You didn't know what they were running towards.
No idea. I didn't know what was happening. But I did get to know pretty quickly. I can't actually pinpoint it. I can't say that at some point someone came and said we're liberated. But somehow, I knew we were liberated ultimately.
Yes. And did that help you get better faster, do you think? I mean, was it a incredible moment of joy, or maybe you couldn't believe it? It's good to be true.
No, I mean, I'm often asked that because people must think that to be liberated is so wonderful that we must have all been very joyful and happy. But in England, they had street parties. I've seen pictures and films, but it wasn't like that.
No.
Well, there was, in a way, I mean, the mood lifted. We felt relieved. We thought, we've got help. and it came very quickly. They performed miracles. They were absolutely wonderful. They really,
yeah.
I must give them so much credit for such being treated like human beings again after years of our treatment that we were meted out during the war. I mean, well, you couldn't compare.
No, of
there
course.
were so many thoughts, losing family who has survived, what's going to happen to us. And it was a bit of a turmoil, really.
I was going to say, I can imagine. That's a turn of phrase. I can't imagine. It's just an extraordinary situation. Of course, that famous Richard Dimbleby report for the BBC that they didn't believe, and he threatened to resign. He wouldn't have run it. They wouldn't have run it if he had not threatened to resign. But I've just got the figures here that he quoted in that report, just to give us the scale of things. He said 40,000 people, 4,250 were acutely ill or dying of virulent disease, typhus or typhoid, he said. I thought it was the same thing. Typhus, typhoid, diphtheria, dysentery, pneumonia, and childbirth fever. 25,600 ill or dying from starvation, 3/4 of which were women. And 30,000, he said, had been killed or allowed to die in the last few months, quote unquote. I mean, absolutely breathtaking inhumanity. Because, of course, as we go on to discover and probe in more detail shortly, this was one of the things about Belsen. It wasn't about the gas chamber. It was about starvation and illness doing the job. So thank you for setting that scene, Marla, the whirlwind journey that got you to where you were that day. Perhaps what we could do now is bring in Ian Forsyth, who you and I had a lovely chat to yesterday. So Ian, as we know, Marla, was one of the very first soldiers to enter Belsen that day, because he was a reconnaissance expert in the British 11th Armoured Division. And he has never been able to forget what he saw that day. He's now 96, and Marla and I spoke to him yesterday.
Good morning.
Hello, Ian. It's nice to see you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. You're looking great. With all your medals.
I wish you hadn't asked that. I did that wee bit. If you're looking great, that would have suited me fine.
So am I right in saying that the first time, Marla and Ian, that you met was at the Holocaust Memorial Day ceremony in London last year?
Yes, it was.
Yes. It was quite an emotional meeting, wasn't it, Ian? You are an amazing man. It's lovely to see you again.
Can I take you back, Ian, to when you first enlisted? Tell us a little bit about the story from when you enlisted to Normandy, in the tank, your duty, your military duty, up until the point you got to Belsen.
My mother didn't want me to go to the army at all. She knew I was desperate keen, as boys sometimes are, to get in there and put the world to rights. When my papers finally came in, she actually threw them at me. I can understand that now. I didn't understand it then. But I can understand her feelings. Because my elder brother was already gone. I don't think she spoke to me for quite a while.
Really? But you went on your way anyway, and when did you land in Normandy?
The Normandy landings were in two parts, really, as far as we were concerned, because somebody miscalculated, and they found that the Marines had a job to do that required tanks, but they had the tanks, but they had no drivers. So they took our tank drivers away, then brought them back again, and then we went over. And we landed in Gold Beach.
So you landed in Normandy. You were with the Hussars.
I was a tank wireless operator. That was a trade in the army for which you got paid an extra 9p a day, which it doesn't sound much now, but it was an awful lot if you didn't get it.
How long were you with the same troop? All the way from Normandy through to Belsen?
There were three of us, a driver, Alan Porter, a gunner, Stan Graham, and myself, the wireless operator cum loader. We made a pact, and it wasn't my idea, that we would stick together no matter what happened. If we stuck together, we would have a chance of coming out. We did stick together. The three of us did come out. But the cost of that was an awful lot more than three.
Of course. Of course.
If I tell you a story, I broke the law when I was in the army. We were going along a road in Normandy when the man in front of me was shot and killed. He was a friend. When that happens, you get so angry. You're going to kill this man if it's the last thing you do. We caught him. And I had him on the back of the tank. And I took his paybook. And I saw a young woman with a baby in her arms and a wee boy clutching her knee. I couldn't do anything. I wouldn't let anybody else hurt him. Because if I had killed him, the young woman would have had to pay the penalty. She would have had to bring these two wee ones up. And the Germans weren't all Nazis. There were human beings amongst them. So I didn't do anything to him, except send him back to be a prisoner so that he could go home and bring his youngsters up in the proper way.
That's very moving. Tell us about the approach to Belsen. What was your job, first of all? Because you were reconnaissance, is that right?
Yes, we were.
What does reconnaissance mean?
Reconnaissance means that you go ahead late in the middle of the night and you hope to find out where the bulk of the enemy is. In fact, you're going in front of the army.
So what were you told? What did they tell you to look for?
There's absolutely nothing. I can well remember now arriving at Belsen. It was a beautiful spring morning as we crawled out of our trenches. It was one of these mornings where it was good to be alive. Nobody told us where we were going. It's just a case of mount up, so you all scramble on, right, go. So we went. But where? Where were we going? Probably some of the officers knew, but we didn't. Now, it just so happened that as a member of the crew, the troop sergeant's tank, we always went first. And that was not the most attractive job, believe me.
What was the first thing that you remember being, unlike anything you'd seen before?
Well, it was the smell. I remember asking Stan Graham, the gunner, because we were very, very close in every way. Can you smell something funny? Well, he was inside the turret, but I could get my head out. Then we saw the watchtowers, because they were higher than the fence. Then we saw the fence, and then we saw, I don't know whether they were men or women, standing on the other side of the barbed wire. And for some reason, they had said to us, do not let anyone out of the camp. So that's funny, because you naturally thought you were just going to throw the gates open and everybody would stream out.
Of course.
But it didn't happen that way. And there are people standing looking at us, wondering whether, are we Americans, are we British, are we Polish, are we anybody? Who is this lot? And I'm quite sure that you would not, Laura, you would not have imagined for 1 minute at that time that there were British soldiers there. I'm quite sure you didn't.
You've spoken about the smell as you approached, and then the horror, visual horror, and the feeding problem.
And they said, don't feed them. That's a strange thing. Because here we are, 5 men in a tank. We carry 3 days' rations and 3 days' reserve rations in case we're cut off. So that in one tank, you've got 60 men's rations. Don't feed them. There's these people standing there. They can hardly stand. But we threw some food over, unfortunately.
Tell us why, unfortunately.
That was one time when I wish I hadn't broken the law, because Anybody who ate what we threw over would die, because all we had were tins of fatty food. Now, after you've been starved for weeks, maybe months, you cannot eat that sort of food. So whoever ate it died.
You have managed to stay in touch with some other people, haven't you, from your time at Belsen? Could you tell us about them?
Terrible thing about Belsen were the folk who were lying dead outside, and nobody had the strength to move them. And certainly the guards weren't going to touch them. I think there's probably about 1,000 or 1,500 folk buried in the one grave. It's horrible.
Horrific.
It's horrible to think about it. I have a friend, he was Polish, Julian Wieciech. He was lying, just like Laura, but he was lying on the ground, couldn't move. The doctors came past when they arrived. They walked past him. But one ordinary man noticed his eyes were moving, and he called the doctors back, and they saved his life.
And you've stayed in touch with Julien ever since?
Yes. He's still alive today.
Where does he live?
In the eastern side of Poland.
How wonderful that you've stayed in touch.
I shall write to his son and tell him what's happened.
And wasn't there a Frenchman as well?
I got an invitation to go to Paris, where they were dedicating a new memorial to the victims of Belsen. He couldn't go back to Belsen until long after, but he finally did go back. After years and years and years, he wrote a book. And then, of course, everything comes back to you when that happens. But I'm going to tell you about Jacques Sorel was his French name. He and his brother found that it was easier to answer to a French name than to their name.
Which was a Jewish name?
Yeah. And they got fed up with people saying to him, even after they came back from Belsen, where did you get a name like that? What kind of name is that you're using? So they decided there and then, his brother and he, that they would change the name to Sorel, which is French. That's Jack as he was when he was captured.
Okay.
How old was he?
11 years old.
11 years old.
So he wound up in Belsen, and you met him.
I met him in Paris,
Schwarzenberg.
That's a wonderful book. Why somebody should suffer like that, I just can't understand.
Tell us the story, because it's further proof of people's gratitude towards you. Tell us the story about the Ukrainian.
Oh, that old lady. I had gone over for the 60th anniversary. I'd been over 2 or 3 times before, but this was special. It was the 60th anniversary. And I was sitting talking to 1 or 2 soldiers, and she came up with this bottle of vodka. And she said, I've waited 60 years to meet a liberator, and you're the first one. And that's for you. It sits on a glass shelf in the Regimental Museum as a memento of one of our adventures. There's a bottle there.
Amazing. Yeah.
Lovely. You weren't tempted to drink it then, Ian?
No, that I could never open. It means too much. And it meant too much to that old lady. She was going to find a liberator and give that bottle to. And you know something? As far as I'm concerned, it'll never, ever be opened. It's part of the jewels of a regiment.
Actually, I didn't ask you many questions last year, but I wonder how you got on after the war with your life, getting back into the civies and teaching. How was it for you?
Very difficult. I went, like yourself, I went through a very rough spell. But that was 2 or 3 years after I came home. I didn't talk a lot at the beginning about what I had done or what I was supposed to have done. That came later, when teachers began to ask questions. It seemed to me quite strange that in the staff room there were very few had taken part in the war at all. I don't know why that was. Maybe some were conscientious objectors, and there was a bit of jealousy too. Those who were and those who weren't. And I think there were only 4 members of the staff who had been in the forces.
Which school was that, Ian?
That was in Gateside Junior Secondary School.
Is that in Hamilton?
No, Cambuslang, which is between here and Glasgow.
I'm just interested in your schools where you taught, because they didn't teach the Holocaust then, it wasn't on the curriculum. Was there anybody among the teachers or the children that ever asked you anything about, your experiences, or particularly about Belsen?
I was asked a question, and this is going on the humorous side at the moment. As I was going into a school, there was a wee boy. He was probably playing truant. And when I went into a school, I would wear this jacket. He shouted after me, he said, "Oh, mister, where'd you get all the badges?"
I read somewhere that you said something very poignant about all the kids were often very interested in the shiny medals. But do you remember what you said about that?
If I am asked by a young person, and mind you, at my age, everybody is young now, why are you wearing those? I would say to them, for every medal you see there, somebody died. And that's costly. There's no winners in a war. Everybody loses something. I mean, I went to school with patches on my trousers and darns in my socks because my father had gone off into the First World War and couldn't get a job when he came back. My mother had to suffer. No holidays for her. So who wins?
Tell us lastly, Ian, about the memorial in Edinburgh.
Oh, I came across that accidentally, and I was so happy to see this bronze plaque. And it was just a thanks from the Jewish community. And I had never seen a memorial like that from one group of people to another.
And then, of course, you were awarded the MBE. Was that a proud day?
That's it.
It's on there.
Well, that's the MBE, that's the Legion d'Honneur.
Really?
That's the Officer's Cross of Merit of Poland. And that's it's the next cross to that one.
I mean, I have a special thank you because, well, you were my liberator. Very, very significant in my life.
It'd be lovely to think that, but I can't.
Well, you're very modest. But very, very wonderful man.
Well, Ian Forsyth, MBE, from bottles of vodka to memorial stones in Edinburgh to an MBE from Queen Elizabeth. I think they are a tiny selection of the plaudits that you have so rightly received. And I think I speak for many people in saying it's an absolute pleasure to have virtually met you. And thank you for everything you've told us.
I don't believe I've merited anything as yet. I've still work to do.
Well, I hope you'll keep on doing it.
I hope so.
Thank you. Well, when I'm able to get on a plane again, I think the first place I'm going is up to Hamilton in Scotland to see Ian. Wasn't he wonderful, Marla?
Yeah.
I think the reason I wanted people to see his story as well as yours is to show the individuality, what it's like for individual human beings, rather than these great big numbers and the scale of it all in it all. And really, that set the tone for the extraordinary cleanup operation and relief operation the British then embarked upon, of which they helped you, of course, Marla, which we're going to hear about in a minute. But just to explain the operational brilliance of it. I gave some numbers before of the number of people who were ill, dying, and people left in the camps. But the British had a huge job, first of all, to get rid of all the disease, stop it spreading, to try and rescue those that were half alive, half dead from the clutches of death, once they'd gotten over that awful, guilt-inducing ignorance about not feeding people who were starving, to kill them. But the delousing process, the cleanup process, absolutely extraordinary. There's a picture here of just an everyday occurrence of one of the inmates being deloused with DDT, insecticide, by one of the British soldiers. That was a real scale operation. There was something you and I were talking about it before, Marla, weren't we, called the Human Laundry at Belsen, which was a giant cleansing station where the British, which the British supervised, the medical corps, but pulled in as many German doctors and nurses as they can to both delouse, nurse back to life. And this is where I apologize for those who are going to get upset by this, but I think it's very meaningful to show you that they are live, just about human beings that you see there in those pictures in that cleansing station in the human laundry. That is what Ian and his comrades had to nurture back to life. And they did an extraordinary job. That's DDT powder, I think, all about the place. Just incredible. That is a human being, alive. That's not a corpse. That's a living human being, just about. And that is what went through. They are the people that went through the so-called human laundry. Awful. But incredible that the British did it for months and months on end. Before then setting fire to the camp to absolutely once and for all get rid of any chance of the disease spreading. I'd just like to show, Marl, if I may, before we come back to you, that final, just the scale of that operation of setting fire to the camp before embarking upon stage 2. As all the inmates and the soldiers watching the final throes of it. So that marked the end of stage 1. That was the end of Belsen as a concentration camp. And chapter 2, of course, was it becoming then in a new location down the road where you were, Marla, a displaced persons camp. So to come back to you and to perhaps some of the nicest stuff, if we could talk about that for a few minutes, that would be a nice relief. Tell us about how the British looked after you. It wasn't just medical, but it was more than that, wasn't it? Give us a flavour of how you were treated.
They were really very kind. There was this enormous contrast between what we had and what we had come to now. And I'll give you 1 or 2 examples. When I recovered, there was a children's home there, and it was newly created for children from all around and other camps. But I don't actually remember that very well, because within 3 months of the recovery, we were sent to Sweden. I was sent to Sweden with a group of children. But during those 3 months after I recovered, I made a very quick recovery, considering the background. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The soldiers wanted to give the children of this children's home a treat. And they organized an outing into the country, into the woods, a beautiful wooded country around there in that area. And they had a band. I remember the tunes. One of them was over the border down Mexico way. I'll never forget that. It's a lovely tune anyway. And we had lovely food to eat, and we were dancing. It was really lovely. And they didn't have to do that. I'm sure they had to seek permission to do it. But when they got it, that was their own idea. They did it in their own free time. So that's just one example. And the other
Marla, was that, sorry to interrupt, that picture that was on the screen before, that I think you were on that truck, weren't you? That was a day out.
I didn't see it on there. Sorry. Yes, I missed that.
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
I was on that picture. I don't know how I acquired it, but I did. No. And it's been with me. It's kept so well for 76 years. Amazing.
Fabulous.
And they also created a kind of theater, which was a big tent. And among other performers, they got the children to perform as well. So I had two things. They taught us a dance routine. One was a classical, so it was a kind of ballet. And the other one was a jazzy one with sort of high kicks. And there was actually a theater, someone who was from the theater and knew how to direct this sort of thing. There were all sorts of people, lots of talent, and it really was all good, I have to say. But there was the other side, because we didn't know who survived. We assumed nobody else did in the family. But I was very lucky. One of my family did survive, and that was my brother, Ben Helfgott.
Yes. We'll come on to Ben briefly in a minute, but I want to stick with you. There's a I spoke too soon. There he is. That was Ben in England, wasn't it? Before you were reunited. Well. Anyway, we'll lose the picture. We'll come back to that in a minute. It was a combination, I think. You told those two lovely stories of what they did, and you can imagine, the spirit of Ian Forsyth living in all these guys. It sounds like they were cut from the same cloth. Really kind, and well beyond the call of duty. Wasn't there also was Sister Luba with you at that point?
Well, Sister Luba was there at the beginning, but then she accompanied the Dutch children back to Holland.
Okay.
So she was away for a little while, and she was actually asked if she would like to stay in Holland. They wanted to give her the hospitality, for good, to live there. But she declined that, and she came back to the camp. And there was also Sister Hermina, and there was Dr. Bimco, who was involved, because she was one of the people who helped to create this children's home. She was the main one, because she managed. She had access to Kramer. She worked in the hospital, and she's the one who asked him for a barracks for the children.
She asked Joseph Kramer. Did you say? Did they Kramer? Joseph Kramer, the beast, the commandant.
Yes. So she had access to him, and she was able to obtain this home. Yeah. There are a lot of wonderful people who are doing their very best for the children. But I really know about the children and not about the main camp so much. There are lots of sites I could describe to you, but there simply isn't the time, is there?
No. Well, speaking of which, we are running a bit over. So let's just very quickly, because I want to bring in Elke Gryglewski. You've got some amazing stuff to tell us. But just very quickly, just to complete the kind of the journey, as it were, you moved on to Sweden, didn't you, before then coming to the UK? Just tell us very quickly about Sweden and then how you were reunited with Ben.
Well, in July, we were sent to Sweden by boat with a group of children. We had a most wonderful reception there. The Swedes were really great, and after it was holiday time, but afterwards they did create a sort of boarding school for all the survivors, the children's survivors. And we were learning for nearly 2 years. Before the 2 years, I discovered that my brother was alive. He found me, actually. And it was decided, and he had gone to England, and it was decided for me to come to England so we would be reunited here.
Wonderful. Yes, Sir Ben Helfgott, another incredible character. But yes, we are a little bit short of time, so we'll move on. But thank you, Marla, for giving us that whistle-stop tour of the post-war. I'd love now to bring in Dr. Elke Gryglewski. Elke, good evening. Hi.
Good evening, Marc.
Thanks for joining us. You've had a pretty busy day. Elke is the director of the Gedenkstätte Bergen-Belsen, the Bergen-Belsen Memorial. Obviously, probably the most important day in your calendar. Was it a success, first of all?
It was a very special, a very emotive day. And for me, it's in a way this program, and I really thank you for this invitation, makes this day more special because it gave me the chance to listen to Marla and Ia's testimony. So thank you very much.
Oh, pleasure. We're delighted you could join us. It's a long day, I'm sure. So what we want to talk about now for 10 minutes is this thing about Bergen-Belsen not only then moving from becoming a concentration camp to a DP camp, but even then there were complexities to it. And indeed, it didn't even start as a concentration camp. So this is where there's some controversy will start to kick in with British role. But first of all, just tell us briefly what made Belsen different to all the other camps.
Yes, although it's in a way a little bit difficult to go back from these very emotional, very strong testimonies to a more rational introduction, maybe it's good to give these informations because they maybe understand, they maybe explain what Marla and Ian lived. The differences between Bergen-Belsen and other camps are, the first one is that when the camp is implemented, it's not implemented as a concentration camp, but as a camp for war prisoners. And it functions as a war prisoners camp from 1940 to 1945. And later on, and this is also the second important difference, the Nazi regime decides to implement a camp that is supposed to take Jewish prisoners into an exchange camp. So they plan to have Jewish prisoners who could be exchanged to war prisoners, German war prisoners in other countries. And that leads to the fact that you have many children in this camp because they bring not only families, but also children. This function also changes. And in the last year of the war, there are many, many prisoners brought to Bergen-Belsen from other concentration camps, which is the reason for this dramatic hygienic situation by the end of the war, because there is much too much prisoners in a place that was designed to have a different function. And related to the history of being in an exchange camp, you have the situation, in difference to other concentration camps, that it's a camp where the vast majority of prisoners is Jewish, in difference to other concentration camps where you had political prisoners with the aim to be destroyed politically or their identity as people being in the resistance. In Bergen-Belsen, in the first year, you had only Jewish prisoners, and then later on, a big number of Jewish prisoners. And this is very decisive for the history of the DP camp, and also to the question of the relation of the British as, well, the ones who save these people, but also to the controversy about their role.
Well, yeah, that's, it's, as I said at the outset, we're not here to, well, it's up to the viewer to draw conclusions from the facts that we present, but your colleague showed me this morning some incredible pictures of all the things that the British carried on doing, both for the Poles in the Polish DP section that you mentioned and the Jewish one, trying to basically re-civilize. So there's a picture there. I think that's a All Souls Day Catholic Mass that the British Army organised for. Yes. So it looks pretty well attended. That I believe was a football game.
Yes.
Who's that bit? That's between the Polish guys, I presume, and again, I presume the British Army.
Yes.
So the kind of thrills and spills that Marla was having on days out to the woods, they were going on for months and indeed years, right up to 1950. Tremendous stuff. And I believe the British also tried to do vocational training for people, teach them to be electricians or whatever, trying to give them a career for their onwards life. And indeed,
yes, this is right, but I think it's also necessary to see that there's a strong power coming from the people themselves, that there is a big sort of organizing themselves to regain dignity, to organize cultural life, to organize political life. I think this is very essential if we look at the history of the DP camp.
So let's as I've been dancing around it now, I have to bring it up. This political tension. Tell us a bit about that. What was going on?
The interesting thing is that the British, on the one hand, are the liberators, and this is something Marla said it, and Ian said it, and I think there is nothing that can diminish this role. Also helping in this role of helping people, changing the sanitary condition, giving medical care. The small but, or it's strange for me as a German to bring in this but the controversy that is being discussed is the point that the British at the same time rule the mandatory in Palestine. And so that for them, it's an ambiguous situation to force immigration to Palestine or not. And so already during the time of the concentration camp being an exchange camp, they did not allow that prisoners from Bergen-Belsen who had papers for immigration to Palestine, that they would move there. And this is something that continues after the liberation, that they actually look at the Jewish survivors with their nationality and not with their Jewish identity. That means they say, which is of course understandable, that they do not want to connect to the race idea of the Germans, and that therefore they want to see, for example, Polish Jews as Poles and British or French Jews as French and so on. But the problem about this is that at that moment, they don't acknowledge the self-perception of the Jewish survivors, which in many cases identify themselves due to persecution more as Jews. And
yeah, I was going to say that you, even if if the French Jews wanted to go back to France, or the Polish Jews, like Marla, wanted to go back to Poland, they weren't particularly welcome.
Exactly, and the point was that many of them had lost their whole family. So if we would talk about going home, in many cases there was no home to go back, and so that was the ambiguity, that it was really difficult for people to organize immigration to Palestine. And this is why the DP camp, the Jewish DP camp, in difference to the Polish one, which existed only until 1946, the Jewish DP camp existed until 1950.
So that is why then, being the largest Jewish DP camp in Europe, Bergen-Belsen, and as you say, being very organized and with all this political maelstrom going on, there was a very strong Zionist movement, wasn't there?
There was, and I think it's on the one hand, it comes from themselves, but of course it also was something like a reaction to the necessity to organize themselves if they wanted to reach something in terms of immigration. So what we talked about, education and so on, was with the aim to get organized that way, to be prepared for immigration to Palestine.
Wasn't there even training the Haganah,
yes,
the Israeli, to teach them how to farm, to set up the kibbutz movement?
Exactly.
It was about to become the state of Israel.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important. I suppose the point we're making here is that there were very real humanitarian reasons for the state of Israel to need to be founded, despite the fact the UN sort of gave the go ahead in 1947 anyway. It needed that final humanitarian push. Now, I suppose the explosive incident was the SS Exodus, which I think we've got a picture of, wasn't it? The turning back of the ship, the SS Exodus. Do you want to just tell us a bit about that?
Well, it was a very dramatic story that there was a ship, the Exodus, going to Palestine, and that they wouldn't let them in, although it was full of refugee survivors. And that it was sent back to Germany, actually. And there was huge protest internationally also for the situation of the people who were brought on this ship, because there was something like a re-traumatization being brought back to Germany.
I mean, Ian Forsyth, I don't think we've got time to show it now, but Ian went on to serve, ironically, in Mandate Palestine. He was there for a couple of years, and he was saying how unbelievably difficult he found it as a human being. And he, as a soldier, he had his orders. He went straight from Belsen down through France, got a boat across, and served there for 2 years. And he just said, "We made it worse. We were meant to be there as a peacekeeping force. We made it worse for the Jews. We made it worse for the Arabs. And what did he say, Marla? The damn politicians," I think was the phrase he used. Mm-hmm. Think they know everything. I mean, unusually harsh for Ian, actually, but he has a point. Well, I think we probably better bring this towards a close. Elke, I wanted to ask you one more question, which is overall, looking at these different phases of Belsen's life and the British role in it, how would you evaluate Britain's role overall at Bergen-Belsen, and perhaps more importantly, to you, what's the legacy of Bergen-Belsen today?
Well, I think the first point, Marla put the point already. I think it's really important to stress what big achievement the British did in Bergen-Belsen with changing the situation of sanitary, medical care, treating the survivors as human beings. I think this is really something that should not be diminished. The small but, and maybe I don't want to trivialize it, but maybe it's the reality always that you also have something like real politics, like, a certain pragmatism in a situation where you're looking at a political situation as a whole. And then it comes to the question that we just discussed with Palestine, and then we can put question marks, or aspects that could be discussed. Couldn't it have been done better? This would be the small but. The legacy from Bergen-Belsen, I would translate into duties. What are the duties of a memorial site today? And I think on this specific day today, it's one duty is really commemoration, all those who died, commemorate also the suffering of all those who were imprisoned there. I think the second duty is knowledge. The distance between this time and today is growing bigger and bigger. And since without knowledge, this commemoration and remembrance won't work. So we need knowledge. And the third duty is related to this knowledge, and that means prevention. I don't know how the situation is in Britain, but in Germany, we're living a very problematic situation that related to the demonstration against the decisions of the government in the corona to fight the corona pandemic, we have more and more right-wing people and people from the middle of the society who are coming back to conspiracy myths, anti-Semitism, relativization and trivialization of the Holocaust. And also in this field, the memorial sites have to educate people, make people sensitive for these phenomena.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. You ended with a brilliant example of the connection between the Holocaust and today. I'm really keen that together we don't present the Holocaust as history. It is part of the present. The tropes of Jews poisoning the wells of medieval times or causing coronavirus today, it's the same problem, and the Nazis simply inherited that. They didn't invent it. It is part of a continuum, isn't it? Elke, thank you very much indeed for coming on. And despite all the emotion tonight, the knowledge, the facts, I think for me that's a very important takeaway from this session. That without the knowledge, nothing matters. The fact that even Richard Dimbleby in 1945 wasn't going to be able to broadcast his program because at the time the BBC couldn't believe it was true. The Holocaust denial and revisionism is, it shows the scale of the problem we have today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Marla. Thank you very much.
Marla, you are elegance itself, and always a pleasure. Your story is amazing. You look even more amazing, and just for everybody out there, we did run out of time. There's a lot more imagery, photographs of really interesting things that we didn't get time to show today. But if you bought a ticket, you can watch this on catch up, and we will be adding new segments in the months and weeks to come. Meanwhile, I hope this has been interesting food for thought for you about Britain's relationship to the Holocaust and its response to it. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about a specific British aspect of response, which is the British Christian response, or range of Christian responses, both at the time of the Holocaust, but at the time when there was arguably something to do about it from the church perspective in the late 30s, and indeed the attitudes and behavior of the church in the years afterwards. All part of the process of examination of Britain's role for you to decide whether Britain was overall a bystander or an upstander. For tonight, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you soon.